Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our continuing series of TechBytes. This is Bill Doolittle, Director of Marketing at Bowers & Company CPAs. And today, Patty Dobbins, who is CEO and partner of B&C Technology Services, will begin continuing the series of TechBytes webinars that we've been having. And our topic today is Excel pivot tables. So very big crowd for this webinar. I think there's a lot of interest in pivot tables, and actually I'm going to be paying close attention myself because I use them quite often and sometimes get confused. Again, being a webinar attendee, you will be receiving future notification of the TechByte series. They'll happen about bi-monthly, about every 2 months, and we'll continue to ask for topics of interest from you in each webinar because that's where we'll try to go, is where the most interest is. In today's presentation, just a note, you do not need these for the actual presentation, but there are some handouts that you can click on in your dashboard. About a little bit down on the right-hand side, you'll see a little tab for handouts. And if you click on that, there's 3 different handouts that you can click on for review later on. After the call. But again, they aren't necessary for the actual presentation. Without further ado, we're going to get into it so we can get into our hour of allotted time. So Patty, if you're ready to go, we're all set.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for taking time out to spend some time with us and taking a look at pivot tables. They are a pretty interesting topic, and we hear about them a lot. See how they might be used in your environment and how you might find them as a valuable tool. So hopefully you're going to find something in here. If you are a frequent user, you'll find maybe a little tidbit that you didn't know. And if you're brand new to pivot tables, that you'll find this really helpful in learning how you might be able to use them. So just to kind of get started and to get an idea of what version of Excel we're all using, I'm just going to go ahead and launch a poll. And if you can just respond to that, and we'll leave it open for 30 or 60 seconds just to kind of get an idea of where everyone is, what versions are out there being used right now. So it looks like we're getting pretty close. I'll leave it open a little bit more. Got about 95%. We're almost there. So I think we're pretty good at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And you should be able to see that there on your screen. So we've got a few people, about a third, using 2010, which is great, and then a little bit more using 2013, and a few of you on 16, so bravo, that's what we're going to be looking at, although the other 2 versions are totally fine. And then we have a little bit who's on 2007 or earlier, and just to kind of note that this is based on 2010 and going forward. However, a lot of the things that we talk about, the principles are the same. You just may find that the fields or the buttons are in a different location for you. All right. So if I could just get you to indulge me for one more poll, and this one is, have you ever used pivot tables before? So if everyone could, again, just respond to that, it just kind of helps me gauge how much time we're going to spend on kind of looking at how to create it. And again, if you don't have a ton of experience in it, that's totally fine. We're going to hit, hopefully, a little something for everybody today. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and just share it out with you. So it looks like, a lot of you maybe are looking at this for the first time, about half of you. Some of you have dabbled in it maybe a little bit. And then others are, maybe more power users. So hopefully, again, we'll have something for everyone here as we get going forward. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and close out the poll and actually get started. Here we're looking at a pivot table, and I just kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at, what is a pivot table and get an idea of sort of how it works before we really start diving into creating them. So this is what I have here is this pivot table. It is based on the data that is on the Data 1 sheet. So if we go back and look at that for a minute, You'll see that here we've got, some column headers that kind of tells us about what this data is. And this data is a couple of companies, Duet Designs and Music Man. And what we're looking at is the total revenue in thousands of dollars that these two companies have done for the last 2 years. And this is broken down by month, so we can see that there. So in our pivot table, what we're looking at is now here it is actually summarizing both of those years, 14 and 15, together across these months. And so we're able to see what they've done for the last 2 years by month. Another thing that we see is that it has a grand total, so that's nice as well. And then we can also kind of, the reason why they call it a pivot table is because you can move this data around. So if we want to take a look at maybe the quarter, very easy for me to bring that down, and I'm just dragging it, holding my mouse button down, and coming down to the rows section. And you can kind of see that green line that's showing up, at least on my screen it's green, that kind of lets you know where that's going to be positioned. And I'm just going to drop it ahead of, in front of the month. So now if I look at it, I see that now it's actually broken down by quarter. And in that, I have these subtotals here. So this is actually the subtotal for the quarter. And then I have my grand totals at the bottom. So we're going to kind of dive in, take a look at all the ways that we can manipulate this data, spin it around, because sometimes when you move data around, you have an insight that you didn't see before. And it can be really valuable when you're analyzing. All right. The other thing that you'll notice when you have your active cell in the pivot table is that you get some additional tabs up here. So Analyze tab and the Design tab. If you're using Office 2010, you'll see this as the Options tab, but really it's the same thing. They just changed the name, as Microsoft likes to do. So you'll have those available for you. They have lots of different things that are specific to the pivot tables and things that we can do. And the other thing that you'll have is over to the right-hand side, you'll have the pivot table field task pane, which is quite a mouthful, but this is where we're actually able to see the fields that we have and actually manipulate the data and move it around. And so let's take a look at the background of this pivot table and actually look at the data. I'm going to just switch back over to data one. As we look at this data, there's a couple of things that you might notice right away. One is that it does have filtering at the top. And one of the things that you can tell from that is that it may be a formatted table, and what they call an Excel table. And if that's the case, you'll also see up here a table design tab that's specific just for Excel tables. And this is something a little bit newer. I think that actually came out in 2010, I believe, being able to create tables. And it's really nice to have that, although it's not absolutely necessary. But you do have to spend a little bit of time maybe prepping your data, or at least looking at it and making sure that it's going to be ready and in the format to create a good pivot table. And that means it's going to be at least a data list. So I'm just going to pop over to data 2 over here. So you can see that this one, even though I'm clicked in it, is not actually a table. I'm not getting that special tab on the ribbon up here. So I know that it's just, this is just a table, or this is just a data list. It's you know, what you might think of as a table. So again, it's got those basic elements. It's got columns. It has rows, also referred to as records. So it has, you know, each of the data elements of these column headers up here. And one of the big things that you want to make sure is that you don't have blank rows in your data when you create a pivot table, because that's going to create some havoc for you. Just kind of looking down through here, I can see that there are no blank rows in my data. So great. Another thing that you want to look at is, although it's okay to have blank cells in there, it's better if all of the data is filled in, but sometimes if you're looking at perhaps sales, there just aren't sales for that particular product or month. So it is okay to have blank cells in there. So I'm just going to switch back to this table for a second, and on data 1, and just take a look at a little bit of the options that are on the Design tab. And I just want to spend a minute taking a look at that, because if you haven't had the opportunity to use tables before in Excel, to use what's called an Excel table, there really are some great benefits to doing that. And I just want to show you a couple of things if you haven't used them before that you might be interested in. So again, you have this filtering here, and I can see that on my Design tab, the filter button is one way that I can toggle these filters on and off. So I can click that, take them off, or put them back on. And one of the nice things about this is that I can just really quickly take a look at if I want to filter some of this data down. Say I just want to see Duet Designs and what their revenue was. It's very easy to do. You can see that it's filtered right here. And if I click on that, couple of different ways. I can clear that from here by clicking on Clear Filter, or I can come down to Select All and choose that, and then that will also remove that filter, and you can see that there by how the icon for it changes. So again, you can do multiple ones. So let's say I just wanted to see January, and then I just wanted to see Duet Designs. It's very easy for me to filter out that data very quickly. So again, I'm just going to go back in and just clear those and take a look at all of my data. Another option that you have here that you may find interesting is the total row. So that is actually a row that gets added on to the bottom of your table that will give you a total. And bonus with that is that you also have a drop-down right next to that cell where you can choose other functions. So if you wanted to see what's the average revenue, maybe I wanted to see what's the highest revenue or what's the lowest. So there are some other nice options there, and you can indeed add additional ones if you want to. This is just a suggested list of the most popular ones. So I'm switching that back to summary. So that's a really nice feature that you have in a table. Another thing that is great about a table is that you can add data onto this, and unlike a named range where you'd have to manually go back and adjust that named range and add those rows or columns that you've added to the named range, a table will do it for you automatically. So if I wanted to add another one here, you can see that it immediately expands this line down around so that I know that this is included in my data, in my table. And the nice thing about that is that when you're working with pivot tables, you always want to make sure that your data that you're looking at is up to date. And this allows it to be updated very quickly. So you can just quickly add in some data to your table, update your pivot table, and you're done within seconds. So just going to do a little undo there. So we're back to our table that we had here. And so let's actually go into creating a pivot table. And I'm going to start that by creating a table here, the way that I do that with this data. And by the way, I said there may be cases where you wouldn't do it. And one of the ones I can think of is if you are sharing an Excel workbook, you're not able to share it and have tables. So that would be a case where you would want to just use like a named range or just a list like this. But if you can, great. Let's format this as a table. So I just have my active cell in here somewhere in the list. And then I come over on the Home tab. I'm coming over to Format as a Table, and I can select any of these options here. I am just going to go ahead and click this medium blue one. And you can see it puts a marquee around where it thinks that data is. And yes, it has included it all. And yes, my table has headers, so I'm going to say OK there. And you can see that now it's formatted as a table, and when I click in it, I get that design tab, so I know that it's a table. And I can actually change the name of the table here, so if I wanted to call it revenue or something like that, I could certainly type that in here and save it. And this field is what the pivot table is going to reference when we actually create that. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to just have my active cell in my table, and I'm going to go up to the Insert tab. And from there, I'm going to choose Pivot Table. And you can see, again, it's selecting that table area. And there's my table name. And it's selecting it correctly. Looks good. A couple of options that I have here. I can create it on a new worksheet, which is usually what I like to do. The other thing that you can do is put it on an existing worksheet, and there may be cases where you want to do that. If I select existing worksheet, I can select then the location, and I'm just going to move this a little bit out of the way. And let's say this is where I wanted to place it. I can click on that. It's going to put that location in there, and then I would say OK. For my case, I'm going to go ahead and put it on a new worksheet. So I'm going to say OK here. And this is going to add a worksheet down to the bottom. I'm just going to double click on this and call it Pivot 2, just to kind of keep me straight about which one I'm looking at. So I know that Pivot 2 is based on the Data 1, or I'm sorry, Data 2. You can see why I have to label these, right? So as you're looking at the table fields, now really easy. I mean, you get this blank pivot table, but that's okay because now you can create this pivot table the way that you want to see the data. So let's kind of duplicate what was in the other one and take company and drag it down into columns. And then I'm going to, well, let's look at it by month because that's how the other one was. So I'm going to put that in rows. And then I'm going to take the revenue, which is the data part, and I'm going to put that under values. And now I can see these values of revenue are in here, and this looks very similar to the other one that we had. And the great thing about this is that it was very quick. So you can see, you know, in this case, maybe manually you could do it somewhat, but in the case where you have, you know, hundreds or perhaps thousands of rows of data, this is going to really make that process of summarizing it much faster. And not only that, but you can also move this around. So if I wanted to see it by, let's say I wanted the columns to be the month and the rows to be the company, I can switch that very quickly. If I wanted to see the columns as, let's just look at years, I can do that, or perhaps years and quarters. So I can drag and drop these around to get the different totals that I want and the different data that I want. So in this case, I'm looking at 14 and 15. It's broken up by quarter, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here I have my subtotals. I can actually, and you might be able to see these little expand. Hopefully you can. I might have to zoom that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring that in. So you can see that I have these expand and collapse buttons here, and those work just like when you're doing an outline or a grouping, because that's actually what it's doing, is grouping these. And I can collapse those or expand them depending on what I want to see there. And perhaps, you know, when you're in a meeting and you're showing this information, they don't really want to see all of the detail for 2014. They just want to see the detail for the latest year, and then maybe compare that 2015 total to the 2014 total. So very easy to be able to do that. All right. There are some other ways that we can, I mean, of course, there are tons of things that we can do here in being able to spin this data. But before we get into that, I want to show you a little bit about how you can connect to external, because what we've done in the last couple here is actually connected to data that is already in our workbook. But you're not limited by that. You can also connect to external data sources. So if I come up here to to Insert, and I'm going to select Pivot Table again. And this time I'm going to connect to a different Excel workbook that I have that has the data in it, the source data that I'm looking for. So here, instead of selecting a table or range, I'm going to choose External Data Source and then click on Choose Connection. And you can see that I've had a connection before, but the one I want isn't there. So I'm going to click down on Browse for More. And that's going to send me out where I can kind of look for that spreadsheet or that workbook that I'm looking for, which is, in my case, Inventory List 1. I'm going to select that and say Open. And now, because it has a couple of different tables, a couple of different sheets in there, it's going to ask me, hey, which one do you want? And this is correct. I want the inventory list. And I know, because I've looked at it before, it does have column headers, so this is good. And I'm going to say OK here. So now it actually connects to that and puts the sheet name in there. And now again, I have an option. Do I want to put it on an existing sheet or on a new sheet? And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and put it here, and I'm going to say OK. And again, I get that pivot table where I can now go ahead and create however I want it laid out. So let's say I want, I'm going to put the months. It's kind of long. I'll leave it for now. The name I'm going to take and put down here. So I can see these items are just like 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I'm going to take the inventory ID number. There we go. And the other thing I want is the value. So let's take that and put that in values. So now I can kind of see how very quickly I can connect to another external data source outside of my workbook. And one thing to note, a couple of things actually, but one is that when you have this pivot table open and it's connected to that data, you're not going to be able to open up that worksheet. So if I went and tried to open that right now, what it would tell me is that it's in use. Another file has it in use. So you would need to close out of this workbook, open up the other one, make the changes, come back in here, but you can refresh your pivot table, and that would update any changes that you made to the source data file. So pretty cool. If I need to see a little bit more data, you can see that just if I was zoomed in and it really kind of ran off the side, I can always close this out. I can bring it back by clicking on the Field List button on the Analyze or Options tab, depending on which version you're using. And clicking that Field List button will bring that pivot table field back. And then down here, I'm just using my Zoom In or Zoom Out. It's just a really quick way to change the view that you're looking at. All right. So that is connecting to an external data source. The other thing that you want to know about that is that if that data source gets moved, this pivot table it'll still be here, but it will be static, and you won't be able to update it with the current data, and it will actually give you an error and say it can't find the file. So just kind of something to keep in the back of your mind if you do connect to another, say, Excel file. If it does get moved, then that's going to create a problem in your pivot table. And you're not just limited to Excel files. You can also connect to an Access file as well, going through that same process. So we're just going to do that real quick. Insert pivot table. Now, and we're going to take a look at connecting to an Access database, which is Microsoft's part of the Office suite is Access. And some of you out there may have Access databases, but keep in mind that you can also connect to SQL databases as well. So you're not limited there. Again, I'm going to choose an external data source, choose the connection. I'm going to browse for more, and I'm going to go to my folder where I have my Access database, and I'm going to say Open. And very similar, to the Excel file, it's looking at this saying, okay, there are a lot of tables in here. Which one do you want? So I'm actually going to scroll down because I want the sales information, product sales by employee. And I'm going to select that again. It's putting it in here, populating. This time I'm going to pick a new sheet because this is getting a little bit messy. And I'm going to say OK. And again, I have my pivot table, same idea. I can put in the employees. I can put in the order date. And then I can put in the sum of the quantity. Perhaps I want product name here. And then I can go ahead and expand these out. And I can actually use my button up here to expand all of them or collapse all of them. So I can do that right from there as well. And you can see very quickly I was able to connect to that Access database, get the information, and summarize it in a pivot table. So those are just some of the other options that you have. And one other one I'm going to show you is the ability to consolidate data from multiple sources. So in this case, I've got a couple of different sheets, and one of the scenarios I guess I can think of for this is maybe you have data that you're exporting or that you're getting from another source, and the way that it exports is to separate worksheets. So in that case, you might have something similar to this where we're looking at the 2014 amounts and the 2015 revenue amounts for these two companies. So if we get it like this, we could certainly create a summary table, but why not create a pivot table? It's really quick also. So again, you're going to start with that same method. But one of the things that you want to make sure of is that your data is ready for it. And in this case, when you're doing multiple ones, you want to make sure that it's in a rectangle shape. There's no blank row or blank cells in here or rows. And that's why this is month company here, because it's telling me these are the months and these are the companies, rather than to have it on a separate row where you would have blank cells. That's why it's compacted here, is because you need to make sure that it is in a rectangle form. And then what you're going to do, instead of going up to the insert, you're actually going to start the wizard that's going to allow you to do it. And that requires a certain keyboard combination, which is Alt and D and then P. And that's going to bring up the wizard, which is going to let you go through, and it's going to help walk you through creating that. So in this case, the data that I want to analyze is a multiple consolidation. So I'm going to pick more than one range. And I want to create a pivot table. That's great. So I'm going to go next. And I'm actually going to create the page field, so I'm good with that. And I'm going to say next. And then here, this is where I'm actually going to select the ranges that I want to analyze. So I'm going to come out here. You can kind of see the collapse button, which I can use, but I can also just come over here and select it, and it will automatically collapse that for me. So I'm going to select my first range, and then I'm going to say Add. And now I'm going to continue to do that with the other ones. So I'm going to come over to Consolidate 14. And I'm going to select this area, and I'm going to add that as well. And then I'm going to come down and click Next. And it's just asking me, where do I want to put it? I'm actually going to put it, let's put it on a new one. And then we'll click Finish. And here we are. So that quickly, I'm able to pull in those two. And I'm just going to slide that over. So here's my pivot table for these two sheets for 2014 and 15. The one thing that you might want to do here is you might want to rename these, because when you look at it and you start dragging this around, it's not real intuitive when you look at rows to see row there. So you might want to change that, and you can do that by selecting it and then coming up in the active field box on your Analyze or your Options tab, and go ahead and rename that field. So in this case, I'm going to call it months, and I'm going to spell it right. Okay, and then this one this column label, I'm going to change the column labels to company. And now when I look over here at the options that I have, now it probably makes a little bit more sense to have company here and to have the months there. And then if I want to start moving things around or switching it, it's going to make a little bit more sense to me as I look at it. All right. So just taking a quick pause here, just to kind of take a breath and get ready to move forward. So we're about halfway through right now. Got a bunch more things to show you. So I'm just going to dive in and take a look at designing some different things that we can do on the pivot table, how we might be able to move that data around or pivot it, and how we can do different designing for our pivot table. All right, so I'm going to just come back to my Pivot 2 sheet, which is a mess right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just, I'm going to zoom this out a little bit, and I'm going to, actually going to delete that out of there, and then I'll bring it up a little bit more. So hopefully everybody can see that. So now I'm going to spend a little bit of time. So I'm going to take the quarter and the year, and I'm actually going to swap these around just by dragging them. And so now I kind of have this view here. I'm going to go expand them all so I can, yeah, there we go. So now I'm looking at the different months. I'm looking at the quarters. Let's say I don't really need the months in this case, so I'm going to drag that off. I'm going to remove that. And so now I'm just seeing the quarters and the years. And one of the things that it's kind of it's a preference, but one of the options is to have the subtotals on the same row as the group. And the way that I'm used to seeing my subtotals is at the bottom of my data. So for me, I like to switch that around. And one of the ways I can do that, probably the easiest way on the Design tab, I can see that I have subtotals here. So from the subtotals, I can choose to not show them at all, or I can show them at the top, which is the way they are now, or the bottom, which is actually what I prefer. And this way you can see that it does kind of clear this out, so you have somewhat of a blank row here. Just to me, it makes it look a little bit cleaner. And now I have the subtotals for the year down here. So to me, I like that look a little bit better. It's really up to you. There's also grand totals. So that would be the one at the bottom. I can turn it off for rows and columns, or on for either one of them, or on for both. So if I wanted to, let's say I just wanted it on one of them, so you'll see it just gives me the grand total here. So really up to you and what you're looking for in your data. You also have some report layouts that are a little bit different, and what we're looking at right now is the compact view. You also have the outline view, which will show you the column names and the row names. So you'll be able to see those labels there. And just switching back so you can kind of see what that looked like in the compact one, it does shrink the table a little bit. So if you have a really large one, you may want to go with the compact, but maybe in this case, we don't really need to. We can expand that out a little bit, and now I can see that this is the company and this is the year. Other option that you have is the tabular form, which again is going to throw that additional information in, and I can repeat item labels or not. To me, this looks a little bit messy. I'd rather not do that. Again, it's a preference. So there are some design options that you have there that you can take a look at. Blank rows I can insert after, so that kind of breaks it up a little bit. So again, you have those options as well. Some of the other things that you might want to take a look at, just just going to switch this back to the compact view. Are banded rows, and banded rows are going to give you that that shading. And sometimes that's helpful when you're looking at a lot of data. It's a little bit easier to keep your place of what you're looking at. And the other option is banded columns. So it really depends on the data that you're looking at and what makes sense to kind of highlight or emphasize certain pieces of that data. And then, of course, like a table, we have all of these options here, and I'm just clicking on that little drop-down arrow right there to show me all of them. And as I move my mouse over the different ones, I can see I have a live representation of what that's going to look like. So no question there, when I pick one, I'm going to be able to see it. That one's kind of neat. It shades the years differently. So I'm just going to go ahead and I guess I'll pick this one. And if you pick it and you move your data around and you decide that you don't like it, it's very easy to just come over and pick a different one. So really easy to change the look of that. One of the things that we talked about earlier was being able to add data to your table and being able to refresh or update your pivot table. And the way to do that, by the way, is on the Analyze or Options page. There is a refresh button, or you can see here you've got that tip that you can use Alt and F5. So you just want to be in your table, do Alt F5, or you can do a refresh here, and it's going to update that data. Let's create one from this sales. And what I've done here is actually added my sales column. But let's say that I needed to add some data for 2016. And because we're just doing this as an example, I'm going to go ahead and select 2015, and I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it down here at the bottom. And actually, we're only halfway through our year, so I'm going to delete that. Going to then go up to the Music Man for 15, and I'm going to select that through June, copy that, and I'm just doing Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste that in. And then I'm going to come here, and I'm going to make this 2016. Doing a Control-Enter to change these all to 16. So now I have some additional information that I've just added to this table, and I can actually see that when I create the pivot table, this data is automatically going to be included. But even better, I'm just going to back this out so you can kind of see where we started. And I'm going to create a pivot table here, and pretty quickly I can do that. There's my table, looks good, new worksheet, I love it. And again, just kind of duplicating what we've looked at before, putting revenue down here, and let's put the year there and the quarter. So pretty much I've duplicated what we had before, and this is based on the sales information here. So I'm just going to type sales pivot, just to keep me straight. All right, so back and looking at this data, just switching back to the pivot again, I'm looking at the grand total, 3683. And down here I can see, if I add that column, let's just do that real quick. Go into Design tab, add the total row, and not what I expected to see there. Let's see. Oh, it is the sum. Kind of, oh, I know why, because I'm looking at sales instead of the revenue. So if we add this up, I'm sure that we'll get that, but let's just do it real quick. All right, so down over here, if you can see where my mouse is circling, I see that sum, 3683, and now going back and looking at that sales pivot, there it is, 3683. We'll just write it right here. so we can remember. Now going back to the sales, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to take off that total row, and then I'm going to add that data back in as I did before. So I'm going to come down to 15, select that, and even though I'm copying and pasting this data, you could see how easy it would be to actually, insert it from another place. So if you just got updates and you need to add that additional information, really quick to be able to add it to the table and be able to update that pivot table. So again, just changing that to 16. So this is all included. Now I'm going to come back to my sales pivot, click on that, and here I can see I still have that information there, but I'm going to go over to my Analyze tab, click Refresh, and now I see that it has refreshed it. It's added 16, and I can see there is my new sum of the revenue that's there. So you can see that in a matter of probably less than a minute, I could really add additional data and update this summary and have all of that information and been able to manipulate it in all the ways that I need to be able to do. Okay. A couple other things that are on the Analyze tab that we might want to look at are being able to take a look at changing the data source. And by the way, if you need to look at if it is connected to an external data source and you click here, you can see where it's connecting to, so that might be helpful if you're trying to track something down. Oops. And the other thing that I see on the Analyze are these 3 action buttons right here. So if I want to just wipe out everything that's in there right now, I can clear all of these fields. And what that will do is just, it doesn't delete the table, but it kind of brings me back to the beginning, so I can create again, the pivot table that I want. And there aren't a whole lot of fields in here, but if you have something that has a lot of fields and you want to just start over, that would be a really quick way to do that. And I'm just clicking undo to bring me back. Select, if I want to select certain areas of this, perhaps I just want to copy and paste the actual values that are here. I can select the entire pivot table and then just pick the values, and then I can do a Control-C and a Control-V to paste that wherever I need to. So there are some options there, and I'm just going to hit Escape to get rid of this little marquee that's running around there. And now back on the Analyze tab, I'm looking at the Move Pivot Table. So if I want to move that pivot table, I can actually select where I want it to go, and you see it's bringing up that existing worksheet, so I could just move it to another area on here, or I could move it to its own worksheet. So if you find that you're working with it and it gets a little bit bigger than what you thought and it's on the same sheet, you can move it to a new one. So easy enough to do. All right. Couple of other things here on the Analyze tab to look at are the Expand and Collapse buttons. That was looking at our grouping over here. So I can actually turn those off if I don't want the option there. I don't want it to, maybe I just need to clean up my pivot table a little bit. I can take those off. And I also can take off the field headers if I want to do that as well. And so those are just toggle buttons where I can, turn them on and off. I'm going to go ahead and just delete the data that's in here. No, not insert. I'm going to delete. And what I want to take a look at is another option that's on the Analyze tab called Slicers. So one of the things that you can do is do filters on your data. And we started looking at, being able to move these things around here. You can do filters from here. And in fact, let's take a look at what that might look like. If I just wanted to do maybe quarters and I only wanted Q2, I can come here to this little drop down over here and click it. It brings up this, very familiar filter option that you have. I can uncheck all of them, select 2, say OK, and now I'm filtering it. And it may not be, when other people are looking at this, it may not be really obvious that this data is being filtered. So we do have a little filter sign here, and we do have a little filter over here. But again, if somebody else is not familiar with our data and what we're looking at, they may not realize that the data is being filtered. So, and then also, if you want to really make some very quick changes, slicers are a great way to do that. So I'm going to come in and click on Insert Slicer, and I'm going to look at, let's say I want the year and company. So I'm going to put in 2 slicers. And here I have them. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to filter the data really quickly, and it's going to show a visual representation of what I'm looking at. So here I'm looking at 2014. I can see I'm just picking 2014. You can see that it's highlighted here. I'm just looking at Duet Designs. I can pick that. Now I can see just Duet Designs. So it becomes very clear and very obvious as you're doing this. And again, if you had like 20 years here, or if you had 500 companies that you were using, this might be a really great way to be able to select multiple ones that you wanted to compare. Perhaps you had to, put these tables into a PowerPoint presentation or print them out for a meeting. It would allow you to come in, select, whatever companies that you needed to, go ahead and get a snapshot of this or print it, and then do another one. So if I want to do multiple ones, I can either click this column, or if you don't have that available, you can use your Control and Shift like you do with other data to pick additional, multi-selections. So in this case, I have chosen 14 and 16, and I can see that I have 14 and 16, but not 15. And so very easy way to do that. To clear them, I can just come up and hit the Clear button. And if I want to get rid of them, I'm just going to right-click on them and say Remove Year and Remove Company. So really nice. Love those slicers. It really helps a lot. Another feature that you have is being able to actually drill down in the data. Now again, this is a limited amount of data, but if you had, thousands or perhaps hundreds of thousands of rows of data, and you were trying to find out, why is this particular one so high? What's going on there? If you double-click on it, it will go out to your source data, and it will drill down and make a separate sheet and show you actually that information. So being able to drill down like that, yes, it does create a new sheet and probably not something that you'd want to do with everything. But if you just see something that looks like an outlier and you're wondering what's going on with that, how did that total get there, you can double-click it and look at the underlying data. All right. One of the other things that we talked about was being able to create a calculated field. So I just want to show you that because that was one of the things that we were going to make sure that we covered, and I know we're getting close to time, so just going to pop this one out really quickly. And hopefully this is, I know this is kind of like a power lunch, right? We're kind of like jam-packing everything in. There's so much that I want to be able to tell you about all of these things, and I'm kind of geeky and I get really excited about it, but hopefully you find something valuable here, and so just let me know if this is too much content in an hour. So I'm going to create a calculated field. I'm going to come in here, go to the Analyze tab, and under Fields, Items, and Sets, I'm going to click that and create a calculated field. This is going to allow me to put really any type of field that I want in here. So let's say it was average sales, right? Sales, I'm going to just name this, and then I can put my formula in. So I'm going to say, okay, it's going to equal the revenue, and I'm going to insert that divided by the count of the sales, and insert that. And now when I click OK, you can see that it's added additional value column because it's added columns here. So this is my average sales for these different quarters. What else might be interesting? So not only can you have just one down here, we've been working with one set of data here, but you can also add other columns as well. So I'm going to take my count of sales and I'm going to put that down there. And actually I want to move it right up next to revenue so that I can see that. Here I have my count of my sales. So these are all the sales I had for Music Man for Q2 in 2014. So I can see that out of 72 sales, this is the revenue amount that I had. So it kind of gives me some insight into, how my sales are doing. And there may be, once you start working with your own data, you'll probably see other ways that you can use it and other things that you might be able to do with that. But just so that you know that it's there, it is a feature that you can use. Okay, one more thing. I promise this is the last one. It's being able to use pivot charts. And pivot charts are really great because they allow you to see a visual representation of your data, not just the numbers. And I can do that really quickly. I can do both of them together, or I can actually create a pivot chart from a pivot table that I already have. So in 2010, you're going to find that on the Insert tab under Pivot Table. After that, you're going to find it in Pivot Chart on the Analyze tab. So I'm going to click that. I'm just going to choose this clustered one because I only have maybe a minute left. And you can see that it plops in a chart for me. And again, I can move this to another page if I want to. This is based on this table, this pivot table's information. And again, as before, I can move this around and you will see that it actually is going to change that data and change the way that my chart looks based on the changes that I make over here. So now I'm looking at here, Duet Designs is blue, Music Man is red, and I'm looking at 2014 and 2015, and here is the sum of my revenue. So I can see very quickly that Music Man is always less than Duet. Duet Designs is doing more revenue year over year. And very quick for me to be able to see that. Perhaps now I want to take away and I want to look at months. So now I can very quickly just compare these months. So there's a lot of other things that you can do, and I'm sure, once you get into charts, again, there's like so many things that you can do. But just to kind of show you that it is a great way to be able to summarize your data quickly, update it when you need to, and be able to put it in a visual chart that you can take and use in PowerPoints or meetings and print that out if you need to. Okay, that's it. I'm done. So did anybody have any questions on anything? We got a couple minutes left. If anybody had any questions, Bill? I think we lost Bill. All right. Are we going to be doing a TechByte on data tables and the new M coding for data creating in Excel? I am always looking for what people want to see for TechBytes, so I will definitely take a look at that and see how that fits in. I actually don't have the next one selected yet, so if any of you have any ideas out there of what you would like to see in the next TechByte, which will be in, let's see, it's July now, so in September, back to school. So if any of you have any idea of what you would like to see in that, please, shoot me an email and let me know, and we'll get that out to you and let you know what that decision is. So I think we're going to wrap this up. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so I think we'll wrap this up for today. I did record this session, so you'll be getting a link to it in emails for follow-up, and just so you know, when you exit, When you exit the presentation, it's going to pop up with a little survey, and in there is a comment section where you can actually type in what you might want to see in future TechBytes. So appreciate all of your time again. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon.